Let me start with a scene that I think a lot of you are going to recognize. It's a Tuesday. Or maybe a Wednesday. Honestly, by the middle of the week, the days have a way of blending into each other until they're all just variations on the same tired theme. You push open the front door and you put down your things. Your bag. Your keys. Maybe your shoes, kicked off just inside the entrance the way you always do. And you stand there for a second just inside your own home, and there's this moment, very brief, almost imperceptible, where you're not quite work anymore and not quite home yet. You're somewhere in between. Still carrying the residue of the day on your skin. You look around. The sink has dishes in it. There's something on the counter that was supposed to go into the refrigerator, probably yesterday. One of the kids left a sweater on the floor, or a backpack in the hallway, or some evidence of their small and busy lives scattered across the living room in a trail that you would find charming if you weren't so tired. And somewhere in the house there's your partner. Also just home. Also carrying that same invisible weight of a day that asked too much and gave back too little. And eventually, without anyone really deciding it should go this way, the two of you end up on the couch. Side by side but facing slightly different directions. Maybe there's food. Maybe the television is on. And both of you have your phones, not because you particularly want to be on them, but because the phone is just there, and it requires nothing of you, and right now requiring nothing feels like an enormous mercy. The evening goes by. You might talk a little. You might not, really, not in any way that counts. And somewhere around 10 or 10:30, one of you says something like, "I'm going to bed," and the other one nods, and you go through the small rituals of ending the day, and you lie down, and you might say goodnight and you might not, and then it's quiet. And in the morning the alarm goes off. And you do it again. I want to say something about that scene before we go any further, because I think it's important. That is not the picture of a marriage that has stopped working. That is not the picture of two people who have stopped loving each other. That picture, the couch, the phones, the quiet that feels more like absence than peace. That is the picture of two people who love each other very much and are completely, thoroughly, bone-deep exhausted. And exhaustion has a way of making even the people we love feel just slightly out of reach. Not gone. Just a little too far to get to right now, tonight, after the day we've had. If you saw yourself in that scene, if you thought, yes, that's our couch, that's our Tuesday, then I really need you to hear this. What you're living isn't a crisis of love. It is a crisis of energy. And those two things, though they can feel identical from the inside, are actually very different. Because a crisis of love is much harder to address. But a crisis of energy? That's something we can actually work with. That's what today is about. Today on Secure Love Psychology, we're going to look honestly at what happens when life gets so heavy that there's simply nothing left over for the relationship. We're going to talk about the 5 specific ways that 2026, with everything it asks of people, everything it demands and takes and doesn't quite give back, is draining couples of the very capacity for connection they need most. And then we're going to talk about what to do. Not big, elaborate, requires a free weekend things. Small things. Quiet things. Things that take 10 minutes and can be started on the very Tuesday evening we just described. Because I believe something that I want to say plainly right at the beginning. A marriage doesn't need two people at their best. It needs two people who keep choosing each other even when they're nowhere near their best. Even on the depleted days. Even on the days when choosing each other looks like nothing more glamorous than setting down your phone and sitting a little closer on the couch. That is enough. And today we're going to find our way back to it. Before we get into the 5 specific things that are exhausting couples in 2026, I want to take a minute and name something that I think goes largely unspoken. Even by the couples who are living it most intensely. There is a particular kind of relationship struggle that doesn't look like a struggle from the outside. It doesn't involve raised voices or slammed doors, or the kind of dramatic rupture that makes it obvious something has gone wrong. It looks from the outside like a perfectly ordinary marriage. Two people managing their lives, taking care of their children, paying their bills, keeping the household running. Two people who seem fine. I think of it as the burnout marriage. And it is, in my experience, one of the most common and least addressed forms of relational pain that exists today. The burnout marriage is what happens when two people who genuinely love each other have been so depleted for so long by work, by parenthood, by financial worry, by the particular relentlessness of modern life, that they have almost nothing left for the relationship itself. Not because the love isn't there. The love is there. But love, the kind of love that actually feels like love, the kind that requires presence and attention and the willingness to be emotionally available for another person, that kind of love runs on energy. And energy is precisely what life keeps taking. The research on this is genuinely striking. Couples surveys from the past couple of years consistently show that exhaustion and not enough time rank among the top reasons couples report feeling disconnected from each other. Not conflict, not incompatibility, exhaustion. People are not fighting more than they used to. If anything, many couples are fighting less. But they're also connecting less. They're in the same physical space but drifting in separate interior worlds, and neither of them quite knows how to bridge the distance because bridging the distance requires something they don't currently have. Gottman's research gives us the concept of turning toward those small, everyday moments when a partner makes a bid for connection, and the other person responds. A bid can be almost nothing. A comment about something you saw on the news. A sigh when you sit down on the couch, holding out a cup of tea. These tiny, ordinary gestures are, in the Gottman research, the actual fabric of intimacy. Not the big romantic evenings. Not the anniversaries. The small moments repeated daily of noticing each other and responding. What exhaustion does. The chronic, accumulated, months and years kind of exhaustion is make those small moments almost impossible. When you're running on nothing, you don't have the attentional bandwidth to notice your partner's bid. And when you do notice it, you often don't have the energy to respond to it with the warmth it deserves. So the bid goes unanswered, and your partner registers somewhere beneath conscious thought that they reached and no one was there. And over time, without anyone choosing this, without anyone wanting it, a distance opens up. Quiet. Gradual. Nobody's fault and everybody's loss. That is the burnout marriage. And it is not a rare or unusual thing right now. It is happening in homes everywhere. Yours may be one of them. Let's talk about exactly how it gets there. The first thing, what happened to the drive home? There used to be a transition. You left the office. You got in the car, or you walked to the train, or you waited at the bus stop. And in that space between leaving work and arriving home, something shifted. Not always dramatically. Not in a way you would necessarily have noticed or named at the time. But something in you was slowly releasing the professional version of yourself and making a gradual, quiet return to the personal one. By the time you got home, you were mostly yourself again. You'd had a few minutes to decompress, to let the day settle, to make the internal crossing from employee to partner, from worker to human being. For an enormous number of people, that transition no longer exists. Remote work changed the geography of daily life in ways we are still reckoning with. When your office is the second bedroom or the kitchen table or the corner of the living room where you've set up your monitor, there is no drive home. There is no train. There is no physical crossing from one world to another. There is only the closing of the laptop, which is a gesture that is supposed to mean something but often doesn't quite, because the laptop is still right there and the notifications are still happening and that email you were waiting on might have arrived in the last 20 minutes. And so people are coming to dinner without having left work. They are sitting on the couch without having fully arrived home. They are present in the room and still slightly absent in every way that matters, their attention still partially snagged on the day that technically ended but didn't really. What is particularly hard about this is that both partners are often doing the same thing simultaneously. Two people, physically in the same room, mentally still partially at their desks, each waiting, without quite articulating this even to themselves, for the moment when they'll feel settled enough, present enough, finally here enough to actually connect. And that moment keeps getting pushed forward. There's always one more thing to check. One more thought to follow. One more loose end from the day pulling at the edges of the mind. And the evening passes. And the connection that was waiting never quite happens. The economic anxiety of 2026 has added another layer to this that I think deserves to be spoken directly. A lot of working people right now are carrying a low-grade but persistent fear about their professional situation. Industries are shifting. Jobs that seem stable look less stable than they did a few years ago. The cost of losing a source of income, in an economy where everything costs significantly more than it did recently, is genuinely frightening. That fear doesn't clock out at 5. Comes to the dinner table. It lies down in bed with you. It sits between you and your partner in the evenings. An uninvited presence that neither of you quite names but both of you feel. The second thing, the work that no one sees. I want to talk about something that has been getting more public attention in recent years, but is still, in the daily reality of most households, profoundly underacknowledged. Something called the mental load. And I want to talk about it here in a video about exhaustion because I think it is one of the single largest contributors to one partner Usually, though not always, the woman arriving at the couch each evening more depleted than the other person understands. The mental load is not the tasks. The cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, those are visible. Those get done and someone can see that they got done and acknowledge them, at least theoretically. The mental load is everything that lives around the tasks. It is remembering that the pediatrician appointment needs to be made before the end of the month. It is noticing on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of a work call that the kids' winter coats from last year probably won't fit anymore, and someone needs to do something about that before the weather changes. It is holding in mind at all times the dozens of interlocking systems and schedules and needs that keep a family functioning day to day. The anticipating. The planning 2 steps ahead. The being the person who knows where everything is and when everything is due and what happens if it doesn't get done. This is cognitive work. Real demanding ongoing cognitive work. And it has no clock-out time. It runs in the background of the mind all day, every day, the way certain computer programs run in the background and slowly drain the battery without you realizing it until you look at your phone and find it at 12%. The person carrying the mental load is not just physically tired at the end of the day. They are cognitively depleted in a way that is genuinely difficult to explain to someone who has not experienced it. There is a particular kind of weariness that comes from never being fully off. From being the person who holds everything. From knowing that if you stop tracking, something will slip through. It is the exhaustion of being permanently, comprehensively responsible. And the partner who is not carrying the mental load, and I want to say this gently because I don't think this is usually about selfishness or indifference, often genuinely doesn't see it. Because invisible work is, by definition, invisible. You see the dinner on the table. You do not necessarily see the 20 minutes of mental effort that went into figuring out what to make, whether you had the ingredients, whether anyone had dietary restrictions this week, whether the same thing could be repurposed for tomorrow's lunch. The doing is visible. The thinking around the doing is not. And so one partner experiences the relationship as reasonably fair, and the other experiences it as quietly, persistently unequal. And both of them are, from inside their own perspective, telling an accurate version of the truth, which makes the conversation about it very hard to have without it becoming a fight. And because it's hard to have and they're both already exhausted, they often just don't have it. The caring partner carries a little more quietly. The distance grows a little larger. And the resentment, which is not dramatic, not explosive, just a slow thickening of the air between them, becomes part of the texture of the marriage. The third thing, the worry that lives rent-free in both your heads. We talked in another video on this channel about what financial stress does specifically to the emotional and relational life of a marriage. I want to return to it briefly here, but through a different lens, through the lens of energy. Because financial stress is not just a relational issue. It is an energy issue. And it belongs in this conversation. Think about what it actually feels like to carry ongoing financial worry. Not the acute crisis of a specific bill you can't pay. That is its own particular terror. I'm talking about the chronic background version. The kind that doesn't usually reach a point of emergency but never quite goes away either. The mortgage that's manageable but only barely, and you're aware of that barely every single month. The credit card balance that you've been trying to reduce for 2 years, and that keeps edging back up despite your best intentions. The grocery bills that are noticeably, frustratingly higher than they were, and you've adjusted your habits and it still somehow costs more. The retirement savings that are happening but at a pace that, when you actually do the math, produces numbers that don't entirely reassure you. That kind of worry doesn't stay in the financial section of your brain. It migrates. It shows up when you're trying to be present with your partner in the evenings. It wakes you up at 2 in the morning and sits with you in the dark until the alarm goes off. It has a way of making everything feel slightly more effortful, slightly more fragile, slightly less worth investing in, including sometimes the relationship itself. And what it does physiologically is not subtle. Sustained financial anxiety keeps the nervous system in a state of low-level alert. The body is operating not in full crisis mode but in something adjacent to it, a kind of watchfulness, a readiness for threat, that is incompatible with the relaxed openness that genuine connection requires. You cannot be simultaneously braced for impact and warmly present for the person beside you. The nervous system simply doesn't work that way. In 2026, for a significant portion of people, the financial picture is not catastrophic. But it is grinding. It is the particular exhaustion of doing everything right and still feeling like you're running to stay in place. Of wanting things, not extravagant things, just the ordinary things that used to feel within reach, and watching them recede. That grinding quality doesn't get left at the door. It comes into the house with you. And it sits between you and your partner in the evenings, taking up space that was supposed to be for something else. The fourth thing, what running on empty actually does to a person. I want to talk about sleep. I know that might seem like an odd place to land in a video about marriage and connection, but I think sleep deprivation is one of the most underestimated forces acting on couples right now, and it deserves to be named clearly. Not a single bad night. Not the occasional disrupted sleep from a sick child or an anxious mind. The chronic, accumulated deficit of months or years of not getting enough rest. The kind that builds so gradually that you stop noticing you're tired and just start thinking this is how you feel now. This is who you are now, someone who is always a little slow to start, always slightly behind their own thoughts, always vaguely running at about 70%. The neuroscience on this is not subtle. Chronic sleep deprivation impairs the parts of the brain responsible for emotional regulation, which means you are more reactive, quicker to irritation, less able to catch yourself before you say the thing you'll regret. It impairs empathy, the capacity to genuinely feel into another person's experience and respond with warmth and care. It impairs your ability to access positive emotion, joy, warmth, tenderness, playfulness, the whole register of feeling that makes relationships feel alive rather than just functional. And it impairs executive function, your ability to plan, to regulate impulses, to think clearly about what matters and what doesn't. In other words, a chronically sleep-deprived person is, neurologically speaking, worse at being in a relationship. Not worse as a person, not worse at loving in the abstract, but worse at the daily, practical, showing up work of being a partner. More irritable, less generous, less curious, less capable of the kind of attentive, patient, emotionally available presence that sustains a real connection over time. And here is the thing that I find genuinely heartbreaking about this particular dynamic. It is almost always happening to both people at once. Two people who are both sleep-deprived, both running below capacity, both privately wondering why everything feels so much harder than it used to, and both of them looking to each other, even unconsciously, even without articulating it, for the kind of warmth and presence that might help restore something. But neither of them has it to give right now. So they sit beside each other in their exhaustion, each one's depletion invisible to the other, each one privately attributing the flatness of the connection to something wrong with the relationship rather than something wrong with the sleep schedule. Sleep for couples is not a lifestyle choice. It is relational infrastructure, the foundation on which every other capacity for connection rests. And it is almost always the first thing to go when life gets demanding. The fifth thing, the conversation that stopped happening the last because I want to talk about, is the one that I think is most quietly painful, because it is the most gradual, and the most invisible, and the one that most couples, when it is named for them, feel a particular kind of sadness about. Not the sharp sadness of conflict or betrayal, but the softer, more melancholy sadness of recognizing something you lost without realizing you were losing it. At some point in most long-term relationships, the conversations that used to happen stop happening. Not the logistics. Those continue. Who's picking up the kids? What's for dinner? Did you call about the thing you were going to call about? Those conversations never stop. But the other ones, the ones where you asked each other real questions, where you sat somewhere together at a restaurant or on a porch or in the car on a long drive, and one of you said something like, "What are you thinking about lately?" And the other one actually answered. Really answered. Went somewhere personal and honest and maybe a little vulnerable. And the first one listened. Really listened. With actual curiosity, actual interest in this specific person and their specific inner life. Those conversations, the ones that made you feel known, they don't stop because anyone decides to stop having them. They stop because the space they used to occupy gets filled with other things. Work fills it. Children fill it. The mental load fills it. Fatigue fills it. And before anyone notices it's happened, months go by without a single exchange that went below the surface. Without a single moment of genuine mutual curiosity. Without either partner feeling truly, specifically seen by the other. Gottman talks about love maps, the detailed, living knowledge each partner carries of the other's inner world. Not a static portrait. A dynamic, ongoing map that gets updated through conversation and curiosity, and the practice of genuine interest in who this person is becoming, week by week and month by month. Because people change. The person you married is not identical to the person you live with now. They have evolved. Their worries are different. Their dreams may have shifted. What keeps them up at night now is probably not what kept them up 5 years ago. What lights them up may have changed in ways they haven't even fully articulated to themselves. When the conversations stop, the love map stops being updated, and you start relating to a version of your partner that is becoming slowly out of date. You think you know them, and in a general sense you do, in the way you know a place you've lived for a long time. But the specific living present tense knowledge of who they are right now, in this season of their life, that starts to go fuzzy around the edges. And what replaces it is a kind of comfortable familiarity that feels like closeness but isn't quite. A sense of knowing each other that is real but no longer fresh. A connection that is warm but no longer curious. And warmth without curiosity over time is not enough to sustain the feeling of being truly known, which is, in the end, what most of us are really longing for in a marriage. What actually helps, and why small is not the same as insufficient. I want to be careful about how I present what comes next. Because I know something about the people who watch this channel. You care about your relationships. You're taking time out of a busy life to try to understand what's happening and figure out what to do about it. And advice for people like you can sometimes land as one more item on an already overwhelming list. One more place where you're not quite measuring up. One more thing to feel guilty about not doing. That is not what I want to offer you. What I want to offer you is genuinely small. Designed for real people in real lives that are already full. Designed not for the best version of your week but for the actual version. The Tuesday evening version. The dishes in the sink version. The I have about 10 minutes before I fall asleep version. Because the goal is not transformation. The goal is not to overhaul your marriage in the next 30 days. The goal is to begin. To reintroduce, in the margins of the life you are already living, the small and consistent practice of choosing each other. Which is, ultimately, the only thing that a lasting marriage is made of anyway. The first practice, small moments, repeated. The Gottman research has a finding that I come back to constantly because I think it reframes everything about how we think about maintaining a relationship. It is not how couples spend their best time together that most determines the quality of their relationship. It is how they spend their ordinary time. The small, daily, seemingly inconsequential moments of turning toward each other or failing to. Those moments, accumulated over months and years, are the actual substance of intimacy. Not the date nights. Not the romantic gestures. The tiny, repeated, ordinary moments of noticing each other and responding. A micro-connection ritual is a small piece of time that is intentionally protected for exactly this. Not therapy. Not a deep conversation. Just a consistent, repeated moment of genuine presence with your partner. The arrival. When you come home or when your partner does, there is something in how that moment goes that sets the emotional tone for the evening. Gottman actually talks about the 6-second kiss as a research-backed practice. Long enough to be genuinely connecting, short enough to be realistic on a Tuesday. But beyond the physical, the arrival ritual is about what happens in the first 2 minutes. Are you actually here? Do you put down what you're holding physically and mentally, and actually look at this person who has been waiting for you or who you have been waiting for? Do you say something that has nothing to do with logistics? I'm really glad you're home. That's it. That's the whole thing. And it works. The before sleep check-in. Not a conversation about tomorrow's schedule. Something smaller and more real. Each person shares one genuine thing from the day. Something the other person doesn't already know. Something that required you to actually check in with your own interior life before reporting. Not it was fine. Something true. What surprised you? What worried you? What made you quietly happy for a moment in the middle of an otherwise ordinary afternoon? This keeps the love map updated. This keeps two people knowing each other in real time, rather than relating to increasingly outdated images of who the other person is. The device-free window. 20 minutes in the evening, just 20, where both phones are in another room and both people are simply in the same space without the competing pull of screens. You don't have to talk. You don't have to accomplish anything relational. You can just sit together with something warm to drink, and let the quiet be companionable rather than empty. The point is the quality of presence, not the content of the time. And it is remarkable, genuinely remarkable, how much that 20 minutes can change the felt experience of an evening that otherwise would have passed in parallel scrolling. These practices are not enough in some ideal world. In an ideal world, you would have hours for each other every day. But in the actual world, in the Tuesday evening world, in the dishes in the sink world, 10 or 20 minutes of genuinely intentional presence is something. And something done consistently over time compounds. It adds up to a relationship that still feels alive. That still feels like two people who are actually in each other's lives rather than simply sharing an address. The second practice, making the invisible visible, this one is a little more structural, but I think it can change something quite fundamental about how couples navigate the burnout seasons of a marriage. I think of it as the energy budget. And the concept is straightforward. You have a finite amount of energy each day. That is not a character flaw or a sign of insufficient commitment. It is a physiological reality. And that energy gets allocated whether you think about the allocation or not. Work gets some. Children get some. The house gets some. Your own basic maintenance, eating, sleeping, functioning gets some. And whatever is left, if anything is left, is what the relationship gets. In the burnout marriage, what's left for the relationship is often close to nothing. And neither partner quite understands why. Because from the inside, each person feels like they are giving everything they have. And they are, to all the other things. The relationship is simply last in line, and by the time everything else has taken what it needs, there is nothing left. The energy budget practice is about making this allocation conscious, rather than accidental. Once a week, maybe Sunday evening while you're having a quiet cup of something together, each partner takes a few minutes to think honestly about what the coming week is going to require. What are the heavy days? Where are the pressure points? What is going to be drawing more from you than usual? And then, with that honest picture in mind, what can you realistically offer the relationship this week? Not what you wish you could offer. What you actually genuinely, given everything else, can offer. This conversation does something important. Creates visibility. Instead of each partner arriving at the end of a Wednesday with nothing left and feeling vaguely guilty about it, they've already talked about the fact that Wednesday was going to be a heavy day. The depleted Wednesday version of you is not a surprise or a disappointment. It is the predictable outcome of a week that was already understood to be demanding. And there is something in that shared understanding that removes the quiet resentment of unmet expectation. The other half of the energy budget is replenishment. What fills you up? Not what you think should fill you up, or what used to fill you up 10 years ago, but what actually genuinely, in your current life, restores your capacity for presence and warmth and connection. For some people it's movement, a run, a walk, anything that gets the body doing something. For others it's solitude. Genuine, uninterrupted time alone to just exist without being needed by anyone. For others it's time with friends or a creative practice, or something as simple as an hour with a book and no one asking anything of them. Whatever it is, protect it. This is the shift I want to offer. Treating your own replenishment not as something selfish that you do instead of investing in your relationship, but as something essential that you do as part of investing in your relationship. Because the version of you that arrives at the couch after protecting your sleep and getting a walk in and having 30 minutes to yourself is a meaningfully different partner than the version that sacrificed all of that for productivity. Not a perfect partner. Not a fully resourced, always available partner. But a more present one. And present, even imperfectly, is what the relationship needs most. The third practice. Actually answering the question, how was your day? This question is asked in millions of homes every evening. And in almost all of them, it receives a version of the same answer. Fine. Long tired. You. And then the conversation moves on. Or it doesn't move anywhere at all. I want to suggest that this question, asked and answered the way it almost always is not actually communication. It is a ritual. A greeting. The verbal equivalent of nodding at someone you recognize in the hallway. It acknowledges the other person's existence. It does not invite their interior life. Gottman's research on what he calls the stress-reducing conversation offers a different approach. And I want to describe it specifically enough that you can actually try it, because it is genuinely one of the most accessible and highest return practices I know for couples who are trying to stay connected through exhausted seasons of life. Here's how it works. You sit somewhere together. It doesn't have to be fancy. The couch is fine, the kitchen table is fine, and one person talks while the other one listens. Not responds. Not offers advice. Listens. The speaker gets 15 to 20 minutes to say whatever is actually weighing on them. Not the schedule for tomorrow. Not the logistics of the household. The actual interior content of the day. the meeting that left them feeling unseen, the worry that's been sitting in their chest since lunchtime, the small thing that went wrong and that they haven't been able to stop thinking about. Whatever is actually there in the actual human being who sat down across from you. And the listener, and this is the part that requires real discipline, especially for people who love and want to help, the listener does not fix anything, does not offer solutions unless solutions are explicitly requested, does not redirect the conversation toward their own parallel experience, does not get on their phone, does not form their response while the other person is still talking. The listener asks questions that open things up rather than questions that close things down. That sounds really hard. What was the worst part of it? Or just, tell me more about that. And then after 20 minutes the roles switch. And the first listener becomes the speaker. And they get their 20 minutes. What this practice actually gives people, underneath the logistics of it, is something much more basic and much more essential. It gives each person the experience of being genuinely heard by the person who matters most to them. Not assessed. Not advised. Not redirected. Heard. In a real and specific and unhurried way. And that experience of being heard, of mattering enough to someone to receive their full and undistracted attention, is one of the deepest forms of connection available in a long-term relationship. Most couples have not had it in a very long time. Not because they don't love each other. Because life moved too fast and the evenings got too full and "how was your day?" became a pleasantry instead of a genuine question. 3 times a week, this practice takes about 40 minutes total. It requires nothing except 2 people and the willingness to put down everything else for the duration. And it is, in my experience, one of the practices most consistently associated with couples feeling genuinely known by each other, even through the busiest, most exhausting seasons. Something I want to say before we close: I've been thinking, as I've been putting this video together, about the people who are going to watch it. And I know some of you are going to hear the practices I've described, the 6-second greeting, the device-free window, the stress-reducing conversation, and feel somewhere underneath your willingness to try them a quiet guilt. A sense of, how are we at a place where we need this? We used to just be close. We used to just connect. Why does this feel like something I have to practice rather than something that just happens? I want to speak to that directly. The shift from connection that happens naturally to connection that requires intention is not a sign that something is wrong with your relationship. It is a sign that your relationship has entered a season that is genuinely demanding, that you are 2 people who are carrying a lot, that the ordinary infrastructure of modern life, the work, the children, the money, the sleeplessness, has been drawing from you at a rate that exceeds what you are able to replenish, and that the relationship, being the most important thing in your life and therefore the thing you most trust to still be there when you come back to it, has gotten less of your intentional energy than it needs. That is not a failure. That is a very human thing. And the invitation of this video is not to make you feel like you are behind on some relationship curriculum. The invitation is simply to notice, to name, to make one small, imperfect, completely doable choice toward the person on the couch beside you. Tonight, on this Tuesday, with the dishes still in the sink and the week only half over and everything else still asking something of you, put down the phone. Sit a little closer. Say something real. That is the whole thing. That is the practice in its most essential form. Not a technique. Not a tool. Just the daily, imperfect, completely human choice to keep reaching toward the person you love. Even when you're tired. Maybe especially then. Before I let you go, I want to bring everything we've covered today back to where we started. We began on a couch. 2 people, 2 phones, a television no one is really watching, an evening passing without either of them quite making contact. And I said, this is not a picture of a marriage in crisis. This is a picture of a marriage that is tired. We talked about why it gets so tired. The disappearance of the transition between work and home, and what remote work has done to the psychological architecture of daily life. The mental load, that invisible, ongoing, never quite clocking out cognitive labor that one partner is usually carrying in ways the other genuinely cannot see. The background financial worry that colonizes presence and makes emotional generosity harder than it should be. The sleep debt that quietly erodes the neurological capacity for patience and warmth and genuine connection. And the slow, gradual, entirely unintentional death of the habit of real conversation. The questions that used to get asked, the answers that used to be heard, The daily updating of the love map that keeps two people truly knowing each other rather than carrying an increasingly outdated image. And then we talked about what to actually do. The micro-rituals, small, consistent, protected moments of genuine presence that require nothing except the decision to show up. The energy budget, the practice of making the energy allocation conscious, creating shared visibility into the week ahead, and protecting the replenishment practices that make you a more present partner. And the real version of how was your day? The Gottman stress-reducing conversation that turns a perfunctory exchange into the experience of being genuinely heard by the person who matters most. None of this is complicated. None of it requires a perfect week or a free evening or any version of yourself that is further along than you currently are. All of it is designed for the life you are actually in, for the Tuesday that is already happening. Here is what I believe and what I want to leave you with. A marriage is not its best moments. It is the 10,000 ordinary moments in between. The small choices made day after day, to notice, to reach, to stay, to choose, that accumulate into something real. Something lasting. Something that knows itself because it has been tested and has held. You don't have to be at your best to do this. You just have to keep doing it. Imperfectly. Inconsistently sometimes. But with the underlying intention renewed as often as necessary. I still choose you. Even today. Even tired. Even now. That is enough. Really is enough. Tell me in the comments, which of the 5 causes felt most true for your relationship right now? And which of the 3 practices feels most possible to start this week? I read everything you write down there. And what you share helps other people feel less alone in what they're carrying. If this video landed somewhere real for you, if it named something you've been feeling but couldn't quite articulate, please share it with your partner. You don't need to have a conversation about it first. Just send it. Let it be the opening. And subscribe to Secure Love Psychology. Come back next week. Because this work, the work of staying close, of staying curious, of choosing each other through the tired and the ordinary and the beautiful and the hard, this is not a one-time project. It is a practice. A lifelong, ongoing, always worth returning to practice. And you deserve a place to keep practicing it. I'll see you next week. Take good care of yourselves. Take good care of each other. You are doing so much better than you think.